Anyone from the UN come out and criticize their appointment? I'm just curious.
The job of UN officials is to work with all 193 member
But
states.
nobody has like an opinion?
They may have opinions. Their job is to make sure that these convenings of global states to discuss important non-proliferation matters.
I mean, the secretary seems to have a lot of opinions about what happens in the Middle East.
Right.
He's commented on that a lot of times, but
Indeed,
you know,
he's
between
repeated,
the Israel and Hamas war. But
Yeah, I agree. He's repeatedly, as you know, denounced the Hamas attacks on Israel, repeatedly met with the families of the hostages when they're
I mean, it's
still
not really a hard
hostages, so-
statement. Like, you know, he could come out and say, you know, look, obviously it wasn't his pick, but, you know, maybe they're not like the best country to be on that panel.
I hear you.
America First Voice is back with another hard-hitting reaction. Today, we're reacting to this House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing where Democrat Representative Jared Moskowitz throws a hypothetical at a witness about the U.S. pulling out of the United Nations. And let me tell you, it's a perfect example of the globalist mindset that's been draining American blood and treasure for decades. If you believe America should put our own people first instead of funding anti-American bureaucrats, smash that like button right now and subscribe. Let's dive in. Moskowitz lays out this scare tactic. What if we leave the UN? What if we kick them out of New York? Then Beijing rolls in, gives them a fancy building, and suddenly the whole world flocks to China instead of America. He acts like the UN is some irreplaceable treasure we can't live without. Classic Democrat fear-mongering. Here's my unfiltered take as a right-wing patriot. We should have left the UN years ago. This bloated, corrupt organization is a taxpayer-funded embarrassment that consistently works against American interests, sovereignty, and values. We pay the lion's share, around 22% of the regular budget plus massive voluntary contributions, while getting lectured by dictators and terrorists. They put Iran on women's rights commissions. They pass endless resolutions condemning Israel, our strongest ally, while ignoring real atrocities in China, North Korea, and Syria. The UN Human Rights Council is a joke.
I ask unanimous consent that my letter of September 23, 2025, calling on the Secretary General to designate Hamas as a terrorist organization be placed in the record. And additionally, his response more than a month later, talking about the need for peace and a permanent ceasefire, but not responsive to my letter.
Without objection.
Thank the gentleman.
With that, I'll turn it over to the ranking member, Mr. Moskowitz, for 5 minutes.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gennarini, did I say that right? Yes. Okay. I saw your graph, right? I would be interested to see the graph and overlaying that with the U.S. budget. You know, obviously the spending at the UN goes up, but I'm just also curious if that's just not an outlier, that our spending has gone up in the U.S. budget in the same way, and if that's just caught up in it. I'm just curious if you've looked at that.
Yeah, U.S. funding for the UN has increased in more or less at the same rate as from other donors to the UN system. In fact, it's generally fairly coordinated, voluntary contributions in terms of how member states sort of divvy up their spheres of influence at the UN.
Okay. Mr. Yao, you mentioned, obviously, that no one from the UN appointed Iran to that, and then it was donor states. But did anyone from the UN come out and criticize their appointment? I'm just curious.
The job of UN officials is to work with all 193 member
But
states.
nobody has like an opinion?
They may have opinions. Their job is to make sure that these convenings of global states to discuss important non-proliferation matters.
I mean, the secretary seems to have a lot of opinions about what happens in the Middle East.
Right.
He's commented on that a lot of times, but
Indeed,
you know,
he's
between
repeated,
the Israel and Hamas war. But
Yeah, I agree. He's repeatedly, as you know, denounced the Hamas attacks on Israel, repeatedly met with the families of the hostages when they're
I mean, it's
still
not really a
hostages,
hard
so-
statement. Like, you know, he could come out and say, you know, look, obviously it wasn't his pick, but, you know, maybe they're not like the best country to be on that panel.
I hear you. I hear you.
Okay, so, you know, I understand they didn't pick, but, you know, they maybe have an obligation to weigh in. I want to do just because I am curious about this. Is it Mr. Kantorovich?
Yeah.
Okay, so because I'm curious about this, I want to just run like a what if. So what if we were going to pull out of the UN, and what if we were going to say you can't be in New York anymore, right? And then Beijing comes in and says, we got a building for you, okay, beautiful building, okay, you can come here. And now the UN is in Beijing. And all the countries around the world now don't come to New York anymore. They go to Beijing. And, you know, they're funding 70% of the UN. Because I think there's bipartisan agreement that there are major issues. I think where there's some disagreement is, you know, do you use the budget to try to reform it, right? Do you use the threat of support to try to reform it, or do you leave? And the do you leave situation for me, I just don't see how that gets better. So I just wanted to discuss
Could
that.
I address the hypothetical?
Yeah, please.
So I don't think leaving is within the political horizon, which
Okay.
is why I don't address it. But I think it is worth looking at what would happen, because you know the argument, but China's going to take over or China will sort of eat our cake if we pull back, is one of the major arguments against U.S. pullback at the United Nations. But I think it's worth saying that the United Nations without the United States is not the same United Nations. It is not the same prize for China to take over. With the United States in, it makes sense for China to try to assert influence because it has vastly more credibility. Without the United Nations, not just in budgetary terms, 25%, right? It's in theory, a fundamentally different organization. I don't think anyone wants to be in Beijing as much as they want to be in New York, and parking would certainly be much better. So I wouldn't catastrophize it. There would be definitely drawbacks, but what I think is catastrophic is ruling that out as an option from the beginning, because it makes it a too big to fail lock-in situation.
Well, that's a great point, right? Is the UN too big to fail, right? I mean, that's a good question, which, you know, I understand maybe from a negotiation standpoint, you don't want to take any option off the table. I'm fine with that. But really, reform seems to be the main option, the best of all options, rather than like what we did with the WHO.
Which is less than quitting the United Nations. Right? That's a kind of scaled down version.
Okay. I don't have anything else. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you so much.
Is
At
a
this
joke.
time, we'll
A who's who of human rights abusers. And don't get me started on their endless push for globalism. Climate reparations, migration pacts that undermine borders, and attacks on our Second Amendment through small arms treaties. The Witness nailed the response. Without the United States, the UN loses its credibility and prestige. It's not the same prize for China. New York is a world capital because of American power and freedom, not the other way around. Moving to Beijing wouldn't magically make the UN effective. It would expose it as the anti-Western forum it already is. America doesn't need the UN needs America. As a proud constitutional conservative and America First warrior, I say this loud and clear. The United Nations was sold to us after World War II as a tool for peace. In reality, it's become a platform for tyranny, inefficiency, and wealth redistribution from successful nations to failing ones. Our founders warned against entangling alliances. Washington and Jefferson would be horrified at how much sovereignty we've surrendered to faceless international bureaucrats in Turtle Bay. President Trump understood this perfectly. He cut funding to biased UN agencies, withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord, pulled out of UNESCO, and put America first on the world stage. Now, with Trump back in the White House, we have a real opportunity to reevaluate every dime we send overseas. Why are we funding an organization that routinely votes against us? Why should American taxpayers subsidize anti-American propaganda? Look at the results. Decades of UN peacekeeping, missions that accomplish little except scandals and waste. Meanwhile, our southern border remains a disaster thanks in part to global migration agendas pushed at the UN. Open borders, fentanyl deaths, cartel violence, all while we're told we must embrace international norms. We need to reclaim our sovereignty, defund or fully withdraw from the worst parts of the UN system, redirect that money to our military, border security, veterans, and American infrastructure. Peace through strength, not endless diplomacy with dictators in fancy New York offices. Support our allies like Israel directly, not through compromised international bodies. The left screams that leaving would isolate us. Wrong. America is the indispensable nation because of our economy, military, innovation, and values, Not because we host the UN, countries will still want to trade and ally with us. China can have the empty building and the endless meetings. We'll keep our freedom and our wallet. This hearing exposes the divide perfectly. Democrats want to stay locked into failing global institutions. Patriots want America first, secure borders, strong military, energy dominance, and no more blank checks to globalists. My final message: never let globalist hypotheticals scare you. The real danger is staying in a corrupt system that weakens our republic. Demand your representatives support full audits of UN funding, withholding payments until reforms happen, and ultimately exiting if they refuse to change. Teach your kids real American history and exceptionalism. Support leaders who put citizens over bureaucrats. If this fired you up like it did me, comment below. Should the US fully withdraw from the UN? What's the biggest waste of taxpayer money you've seen from them? Smash like if you stand with America first and President Trump. Share with every patriot. We need strong borders, a strong military, sovereign foreign policy, and an unapologetic love for this republic. Stay vigilant. Stay sovereign. God bless our troops. God bless Israel. And God bless the United States of America, the greatest nation on earth.